The alarm clock screams at 5:47 IEM. But Celestine Waverly is already awake, staring at the ceiling of her tiny apartment above the daily grind. Sleep has become a stranger lately, replaced by restless thoughts and the weight of invisible burdens. She rises in the pre-dawn darkness, her bare feet finding the cold wooden floor with practiced precision. The same coffee-stained counter awaits her downstairs, witness to thousands of rushed mornings and hurried conversations. The same espresso machine that hisses and gurgles like an old friend with secrets to tell. For 8 years this has been her world. 4 walls, the scent of roasted beans, and the endless stream of customers who see her as nothing more than the woman who makes their morning possible. But today something's different. As Celestine wipes down that familiar counter, there's a flutter in her chest she can't quite name. Maybe it's the way the morning light catches the dust motes dancing above the coffee grinder. Or maybe it's the phone call that's coming in exactly 3 hours and 17 minutes. The one that will change everything. The call that will prove that sometimes the most extraordinary transformations happen to the most ordinary people in the most unexpected ways. You see, everyone who walks through that door sees the same thing. A quiet woman in her 30s with gentle eyes and calloused hands. Someone who remembers how they take their coffee, but whose own story remains invisible. They don't know that behind her patient smile lies a heart that's been collecting kindness like pennies in a jar, waiting for the right moment to spend it all. They don't know that this unassuming coffee shop worker is about to make a decision that will ripple through dozens of lives, proving that heroism doesn't always wear a cape, sometimes it wears an apron. Celestine Waverly had perfected the art of invisibility. At 34, she moved through the world like a whisper, present but unnoticed, essential but unacknowledged. Her apartment above the daily grind was a testament to a life lived quietly. Second-hand furniture arranged with care, books stacked in neat towers because she couldn't afford proper shelves, and a single window that looked out onto the street where real life seemed to happen to other people. The neighborhood around her had changed dramatically during those 8 years. What used to be a working-class area filled with families and elderly couples had slowly transformed into something trendy and expensive. Coffee shops like theirs were no longer just places to grab a quick caffeine fix. They were destinations, photo opportunities, stages for important phone calls and first dates. The gentrification had brought new customers with more money and less patience, people who ordered complex drinks and left tips that reflected their mood rather than her service. But there was one constant in all this change: Sunshine Haven Orphanage, directly across the street. A red brick building that had stood there for 40 years, housing children who, like Celestine herself once had, were waiting for someone to choose them. From her position behind the counter, she could see the playground where kids ran and laughed during recess, their voices carrying across the street like music. She'd watch some of them grow up and move on, while others seemed to stay forever, their faces growing older but their eyes maintaining that careful hope that maybe, just maybe, today would be the day their lives would change. Sister Evangeline, the orphanage director, occasionally stopped by for coffee, always black, always paid for with exact change counted out from a small purse that had seen better days. During these visits, she'd sometimes mention the orphanage's struggles. The leaky roof that got worse every winter, the outdated heating system, the constant worry about funding cuts that could force them to close. Celestine had never told anyone, but she'd been leaving anonymous gifts at the orphanage for years. Small things, art supplies left on the doorstep, warm blankets during cold spells, grocery gift cards slipped under the door. She'd sign them from a friend, and watch from her window as Sister Evangeline would find them, her face lighting up with surprised gratitude. The morning rush at the daily grind was a symphony of chaos, conducted by caffeine addiction and time pressure. Celestine moved through it with practiced grace, her hands working independently, while her mind wandered to the children across the street. Thornton Blackwell was the worst part of most mornings. A corporate lawyer who dressed in suits that cost more than Celestine made in a month, he had the particular kind of cruelty that came from never having to worry about money. He'd stride in at exactly 7:23 a.m., demanding his usual, a double-shot espresso with steamed almond milk and a hint of vanilla, while simultaneously barking orders into his phone and treating Celestine like she was an inconvenience rather than the person making his morning possible. This morning was no different. Thornton burst through the door like he owned the place, his phone already pressed to his ear. "I don't care what the environmental report says," he was saying. "If we can't build there, we'll find somewhere else." Celestine began preparing his drink without being asked, her muscle memory taking over while she half listened to his conversation. Something about a development project, something about people who needed to be realistic about progress. "And if those orphanage people keep making noise about their precious building," Thornton continued, not caring that his voice carried across the small cafe, "remind them that progress waits for no one. There are plenty of other places for unwanted kids." Celestine's hand stilled on the espresso machine. The casual cruelty in his voice made her stomach turn. She finished his drink in silence, her mind racing. "Your usual," she said quietly, sliding the cup across the counter. He grabbed it without acknowledgement, still talking. "These bleeding hearts need to understand that sometimes you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet. The city needs development, not more charity cases." After he left, Celestine stood there for a long moment, staring at the 25-cent tip he'd left on the counter. Through the window she could see children playing in the orphanage courtyard, their laughter a stark contrast to the coldness that had just walked out of her cafe. Marlo Stevens arrived an hour later, as she did every Tuesday and Thursday. A single mother of two who worked double shifts at the hospital, she always looked exhausted but tried to hide it behind a bright smile. She'd order a small coffee and sit in the corner booth, making it last as long as possible, while she caught up on paperwork. "The usual?" Celestine asked, already reaching for a cup. "Actually," Marlo said, digging through her purse, "just a small coffee today, black. I'm trying to cut back on expenses." Celestine nodded, but when she handed over the coffee, she didn't mention the price. Instead, she smiled and said, "Don't worry about it today. Consider it a sample of our new blend." Marlo's eyes filled with tears. "You don't have to do that." "I know," Celestine said simply, "but I want to." It was interactions like these that made the difficult customers bearable. Celestine had learned to read people's stories, in the way they ordered their coffee, in the length of their pauses, in the weight of their shoulders. The phone call came at 11:15 a.m., just as the morning rush was settling into the quieter rhythm of late morning. Celestine was refilling the sugar dispensers when the cafe old landline rang. A sound so unusual that she nearly dropped the sugar container. "The Daily Grind," she answered, expecting a supplier, or maybe someone asking for directions. "Is this Celestine Waverly?" The voice was professional, unfamiliar. "Yes, this is she." "Mrs. Waverly, this is Jonathan Hartwell from Hartwell, Morrison and Associates. I'm calling about the estate of your great-aunt, Cordelia Ashworth." Celestine frowned. "I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong number. I don't have a great-aunt named Cordelia." "Ms. Waverly, I understand this might be confusing. Cordelia Ashworth was your grandmother's sister. She passed away 3 weeks ago, and you're listed as her sole beneficiary." The words seemed to echo in the small cafe. Celestine sank onto the stool behind the counter, her mind reeling. Her grandmother had died when she was 12, and she'd never mentioned having a sister. Celestine had grown up in foster care, bouncing between homes, always told she had no family, along with her daughter. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Miss Ashworth was quite specific in her will. She'd been tracking your whereabouts for years, wanting to ensure her estate would go to family. She left you everything, her house, her investments, her savings. The total estate is valued at approximately $2.3 million. The sugar dispenser slipped from Celestine's numb fingers, clattering to the floor and spilling white crystals across the worn linoleum. $2.3 million. The number was so large it seemed fictional, like something from a movie or a dream. "Mrs. Waverly, are you there?" "Yes," she managed. "I'm here. I know this is a lot to process. Would you be able to come to our office this afternoon to discuss the details?" After hanging up, she stood in the empty cafe, surrounded by spilled sugar, and the impossible weight of sudden wealth. Through the window she could see the children playing, their voices carrying across the street like a promise. And for the first time in her life, Celestine Waverly began to understand what it meant to have the power to change everything. That night Celestine couldn't sleep. She walked through her small apartment like a ghost, touching familiar objects that suddenly felt foreign. The inheritance was real she'd spent. The afternoon in the lawyer's office, signing papers and listening to explanations about investments and property values. But instead of planning vacations or shopping sprees, her mind kept returning to the conversation she'd overheard that morning. Thornton's casual cruelty about the orphanage, his dismissive attitude toward unwanted kids. She thought about Sister Evangeline's quiet worry about funding, about the children who might have to be relocated if the orphanage closed. At 3 a.m. she gave up on sleep and walked to her window. The orphanage was dark except for a few safety lights, but she could imagine the children inside, sleeping in their narrow beds, dreaming of futures they might never have the chance to reach. She thought about her own childhood, about the foster homes that had felt more like way stations than homes, about the constant feeling of being temporary, unwanted, invisible. The money could change her life completely. She could quit the cafe, buy a house, travel the world, never worry about bills again. But as she stood there looking at the orphanage, she realized that maybe mattering wasn't about being seen. Maybe it was about seeing others, about using whatever power you had to lift up the people who needed it most. By morning she'd made her decision. Indira Patel, who owned the bookstore next door, stopped by around 4 p.m. as she often did. She was one of the few people Celestine considered a friend, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a gentle way of asking questions. "You seem different today," Indira observed, settling into her usual spot at the counter with a cup of tea. "Something's happened, hasn't it?" Celestine looked at her friend, debating how much to reveal. "I've inherited some money," she said finally. "Quite a bit, actually." Indira's eyes widened. "That's wonderful. How much?" "Enough to never worry about money again," Celestine said carefully. "But I've decided to give most of it away." "Give it away?" Indira set down her teacup. "Celestine, are you sure? This could be your chance to finally live the life you deserve." "What if the life I deserve is the one where I help others live theirs?" Celestine asked. "I've been invisible my whole life, Indira. Maybe this is my chance to make other people visible." "You're talking about the orphanage, aren't you?" Celestine nodded. "They're going to close if they don't get funding. Those children will be scattered to different facilities, separated from each other, from Sister Evangeline, from the only home some of them have ever known." Indira reached across the counter and squeezed her friend's hand. "You're extraordinary, you know that?" "No," Celestine said quietly. "I'm just finally in a position to be useful." At 6 p.m., Celestine closed the cafe and walked across the street to the orphanage. Her hands were shaking as she knocked on the door, clutching a folder of papers that represented more money than most people saw in a lifetime. Sister Evangeline opened the door with a smile that faltered when she saw Celestine's serious expression. "Dear, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "In a way I have," Celestine said. "Sister, could we talk privately?" They walked to Sister Evangeline's small office, past the common room where several children were doing homework. The walls were covered with artwork and thank-you letters, evidence of the love and care that filled this place despite its financial struggles. "Sister," Celestine began, then stopped. "How did you announce that you were about to change everything?" "I've recently inherited some money. A significant amount." Sister Evangeline nodded politely, waiting for her to continue. "I want to donate $1 million to the orphanage." The words hung in the air like a prayer. Sister Evangeline's face went completely still, her eyes searching Celestine's face for any sign that this was some kind of joke. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" $1 million, Celestine repeated, opening the folder and pulling out the bank documents. "I've already spoken to my lawyer and the bank. The funds can be transferred immediately." Sister Evangeline's hands went to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. "Celestine, I don't understand. How? Why?" "I recently learned that I had a great aunt I never knew about. She left me her estate. As for why—" Celestine looked toward the common room, where she could hear the children's voices. "I grew up in foster care, sister. I know what it's like to be unwanted, to be temporary. This place gives these children something I never had: stability, love, a real home. I can't let it close." The older woman was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "Do you know what this means? We can fix the roof, update the heating system, expand our programs. We can take in more children, hire more staff." "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say," Celestine said, her own voice thick with emotion. As they separated from an emotional embrace, there was a soft knock on the door. Sister Evangeline wiped her eyes and called, "Come in." A small girl with curly hair and serious eyes peeked around the door. "Sister Evangeline? Is everything okay? We heard crying." "Everything's more than okay, Zara," Sister Evangeline said, her voice bright with joy. "Come here, sweetheart. I want you to meet someone very special." Zara approached cautiously, her eyes moving between the two adults. She was 7 years old, had been at the orphanage for 3 years, and had the particular wariness of a child who'd learned that good things were often temporary. "Zara, this is Miss Celestine. She works at the coffee shop across the street." "I know," Zara said. "I watch her sometimes from the window. She's always nice to people, even when they're mean to her." Celestine's heart clenched. "You watch me?" "Sometimes when I can't sleep, I look out the window and watch the people. You're always gentle with everyone, even the angry man who yells at his phone." "Well, Zara," Sister Evangeline said, her voice trembling with emotion, "Miss Celestine has just done something incredible. She's given us enough money to make sure you never have to leave here, that this will always be your home." Zara's eyes went wide. "Really? We don't have to go away?" "Really," Celestine said, kneeling down to the girl's level. "This is your home, and it always will be." Zara threw her arms around Celestine's neck, and in that moment Celestine felt something she'd never experienced before: the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was supposed to do. Word of the anonymous donation spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. By the next morning there were reporters at the orphanage trying to get the story of the mysterious benefactor who'd saved Sunshine Haven. Sister Evangeline, honoring Celestine's request for privacy, would only say that the donor wished to remain anonymous. At the cafe, the speculation was intense. Customers who'd never shown interest in the orphanage before suddenly had theories about who might have donated such a large sum. Thornton Blackwell had his own theory, which he shared loudly during his morning coffee run. "Mark my words," he announced. "This is some kind of publicity stunt. Nobody gives away that kind of money without wanting something in return." Celestine listened to this with a calm smile, preparing his usual order with steady hands. When she handed him his coffee, she looked directly into his eyes and said, "I hope you have a wonderful day, Mr. Blackwell." Something in her tone made him pause, coffee cup halfway to his lips. For a moment he looked at her, really looked at her, and seemed to see something that made him uncomfortable. He left without his usual complaints. The changes at the orphanage were immediate and dramatic. Construction crews arrived to fix the roof and update the heating system. New playground equipment was installed. The children got new clothes, new books, new art supplies. Most importantly, the fear that had hung over the place like a cloud was gone. Celestine found herself drawn to the orphanage more and more. She started volunteering on weekends, helping with homework, reading stories, just spending time with the children. Sister Evangeline welcomed her with open arms, and gradually, Celestine began to feel like she was part of something bigger than herself. Zara became especially attached to her, following her around during her visits and asking endless questions. "Will you teach me to make coffee?" she asked one Saturday afternoon. "When you're older," Celestine promised. "But first you need to focus on school." "What do you want to be when you grow up?" "I want to help people," Zara said without hesitation. "Like you do." "Like I do?" "Sister Evangeline told me that angels sometimes look like regular people, and they help without wanting anything back. She said, That's what you are. An angel who looks like a coffee lady. 3 months after the donation, Sister Evangeline approached Celestine with news that would test her resolve. "We've had some inquiries about adoptions," she said carefully. "And one family is very interested in Zara." Celestine felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. She'd grown so attached to the little girl. The thought of Zara leaving was devastating. "That's wonderful," she managed to say. "That's what we want, isn't it? For the children to find families? The Hendersons. They're a couple in their 30s, been trying to have children for years. He's a teacher, she's a librarian. They live in a small town about an hour from here, with a big yard and good schools. They sound perfect," Celestine said, and meant it, even though her heart was breaking. When she told Zara the news, the little girl's reaction was complicated. She was excited about the possibility of having a family, but scared about leaving the only home she'd known for years. "Will you still be my friend?" Zara asked, her small hand gripping Celestine's tightly. "Always," Celestine promised. "No matter where you go, I will always be your friend." The day Zara left was both heartbreaking and beautiful. The entire orphanage gathered to say goodbye, and there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Zara hugged everyone, but she saved her longest hug for Celestine. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. For making it so I could stay here long enough to find my family." "Thank you," Celestine whispered back, "for showing me what it means to love someone completely." 6 months later, Celestine received a letter from Zara, written in careful second-grade handwriting, with a drawing of a house and a dog, and 3 stick figures labeled Mom, Dad, and me. "Dear Miss Celestine," the letter read, "I am very happy in my new home. Sunny is the best dog ever, and Mom and Dad are teaching me to cook. I made a friend at school named Emma, and she wants to meet you someday. I told her you are an angel who looks like a coffee lady. I hope you are happy too. I love you forever. Your friend, Zara." 1 year after the donation, the transformation was complete. Sunshine Haven had not only survived but thrived. The orphanage had expanded, hired additional staff, and developed programs that were being studied by child welfare organizations. Most importantly, 12 children had found permanent homes. Celestine still worked at the daily grind, but everything had changed. She'd bought the building, ensuring the cafe would remain a community gathering place. She'd also bought a small house 3 blocks away with a garden where she grew vegetables that she shared with the orphanage. The neighborhood had changed too. Instead of the orphanage being pushed out by development, it had become the heart of a community renaissance. The success of Sunshine Haven had attracted other nonprofits and small businesses that prioritized people over profit. Even Thornton had become part of this transformation. 3 months after the donation, he'd arrived at the cafe looking uncharacteristically subdued. "I owe you an apology," he'd said quietly. "I've been rude to you for years, and you've never deserved it." "Thank you for saying that," Celestine had replied. "I've been thinking about those kids over there. I said some things I'm not proud of. I've been thinking about setting up a scholarship fund for kids aging out of foster care. Would you help me figure out how to do that?" That conversation had led to the Blackwell Education Foundation, which had already provided scholarships to 6 young people. Thornton still came in for coffee every morning, but now he often stayed to chat. And he always left a generous tip. On a crisp October morning, exactly 1 year after the donation, a news reporter finally tracked down the story. After months of investigation, Janet Morrison from Channel 7 News knocked on the cafe door. "Mrs. Waverly, I know you're the anonymous donor," she said directly. Celestine stood in her doorway, feeling exposed. "Why does it matter? The children are safe, the orphanage is thriving. It matters because stories like yours give people hope," Janet said gently. "You're a hero." "I'm not a hero," Celestine said firmly. "I'm just someone who had an opportunity to help and took it." "But that's exactly what makes you extraordinary." Sister Evangeline appeared beside her. "Janet, you need to understand something about Celestine. She's been helping people long before she had any money to give. She's been quietly taking care of this community for years, 1 cup of coffee at a time." The news story aired that evening, and by the next morning, the daily grind was packed with customers who'd come to meet the woman who'd become a local legend. What surprised Celestine most was how many people told her about their own acts of kindness. The volunteer work they did, the neighbors they helped, the small ways they tried to make the world better. "You've inspired us," said Mrs. Chen, her former boss who'd driven up from Florida just to see her. "You've reminded us that we all have the power to change lives, no matter how much money we have." That evening, Celestine sat in her garden, watching the sunset. Across the street, the orphanage was settling into its evening routine, warm light spilling from windows where children were having dinner, doing homework, being tucked into bed by people who loved them. She thought about Zara in her new home, about all the children who'd found families, about the ones who were still here but knew they were safe. She thought about how this place had become a real community, about how even someone like Thornton could change. As the stars began to appear, Celestine felt a profound sense of peace. She'd started this journey as a woman who served coffee all day, invisible to most of the world, but in choosing to give away a fortune, she'd found something much more valuable: purpose, love, community, and the knowledge that every person has the power to change the world, one act of kindness at a time. The next morning, she'd open the cafe again, make coffee for her neighbors, and continue the quiet work of caring for her community. But now she did it knowing that she was part of something bigger, that her small acts of service were threads in a tapestry of human connection. The coffee would always be there, steam rising from cups held by hands that needed warming. The children would always be there, growing up loved and safe in the home she'd helped secure. The community would always be there, bound together by the simple truth that caring for each other was the most important work any of us could do. She'd served coffee all day and donated $1 million that evening, but the real transformation hadn't happened in a single moment. It had been building for years, one kind gesture at a time, one person at a time, because that's what love does. It multiplies, it spreads, it transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it helps you understand that you were never invisible at all. You were just waiting for the right moment to shine. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that anyone can be a hero, hit that like button and let me know in the comments about a time when you witnessed unexpected kindness, or when someone's simple act of generosity changed your day. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the extraordinary people hiding in plain sight all around us, because everyone has a story worth telling, and everyone has the power to change the world. The Ripple Effect: How One Woman's Gift Transformed an Entire City. 2 years after Celestine's donation made headlines, something extraordinary began happening in cities across the country. What started as one woman's quiet act of generosity had sparked what researchers now call the Celestine Effect, a documented phenomenon where ordinary people, inspired by her story, began making extraordinary sacrifices for their communities. Dr. Miranda Hoffman, a behavioral economist at Stanford University, has been tracking this movement since its inception. "What we're seeing is unprecedented," she explains from her cluttered office overlooking the campus. "Typically, philanthropic giving follows predictable patterns. Wealthy individuals making tax-beneficial donations to established institutions. But Celestine's story broke that mode completely. She wasn't wealthy until that moment, and she gave away the vast majority of her windfall immediately, asking for nothing in return. The numbers tell a remarkable story. In the 18 months following the news report about Celestine's donation, small-scale community giving increased by 340% nationwide. More significantly, the demographic of givers shifted dramatically. Instead of the typical profile of established donors, wealthy retirees and successful entrepreneurs, the new wave consisted primarily of working-class individuals making modest but meaningful contributions to local causes. Elena Vasquez exemplifies this trend. A dental hygienist from Phoenix, Arizona, she watched Celestine's story on her lunch break and felt something shift inside her. "I kept thinking about how she chose to see what others needed instead of what she wanted," Elena recalls. "I realized I'd been waiting my whole life for the right time to help people, as if having more money would somehow make me more qualified to care. Alina's response was both simple and profound. She began bringing home-cooked meals to the elderly residents in her apartment complex every Sunday. When she learned that Mrs. Rodriguez in 3B couldn't afford her diabetes medication, Alina quietly covered the cost. Within 6 months, her building had transformed from a collection of strangers into a genuine community, with neighbors checking on each other and sharing resources. The beautiful thing about Alina's story, Dr. Hoffman notes, is that it demonstrates how Celestine's example gave people permission to act on impulses they'd always had but never trusted. The donation wasn't just about the money, it was about the courage to believe that ordinary people can create extraordinary change. This courage manifested differently across the country. In Portland, Oregon, Marcus Thompson, a UPS driver, began leaving inspirational notes and small gifts for customers on his route who seemed to be struggling. His random Tuesday surprises became legendary in his delivery area, prompting other drivers in the company to start similar initiatives. In rural Montana, high school teacher Priya Nakamura used her modest inheritance from her grandmother, a fraction of what Celestine had received, to establish a tool library where community members could borrow everything from power drills to bread makers. "I thought about keeping the money for a down payment on a house," Priya admits, "but then I remembered how Celestine chose to multiply opportunity rather than accumulate possessions. The tool library has helped over 400 families save money while building things that matter to them." The psychological impact of Celestine's story extends beyond individual actions to reshape entire communities' understanding of wealth and responsibility. Father Miguel Santos, who runs a food pantry in East Los Angeles, has noticed a fundamental shift in how people view their capacity to help others. Before, people would say, "I wish I could help, but I don't have enough," Father Santos explains. Now they say, "I may not have much, but I have something." That change in language represents a revolution in thinking. Celestine showed us that the question isn't whether you have enough to make a difference, it's whether you have the heart to try. Perhaps most remarkably, the movement has begun attracting academic attention from fields beyond economics. Sociologist Dr. James Liu from Columbia University has documented how communities touched by Celestine-inspired giving show measurably higher levels of social cohesion, lower crime rates, and improved mental health outcomes among residents. What we're witnessing challenges fundamental assumptions about human nature and community development, Dr. Liu observes. Traditional models suggest that social improvement requires top-down intervention or significant financial investment, but these communities are improving themselves through networks of small, consistent acts of care. It's as if Celestine's story gave people a new vocabulary for what it means to be neighbors. The ripple effects continue, expanding in unexpected directions. Social media algorithms, typically designed to promote divisive content, have begun highlighting stories of local generosity, creating virtual communities around shared acts of kindness. Employers report increased morale and cooperation among workers who participate in community giving. Even financial institutions have begun offering community impact accounts that make it easier for people to set aside small amounts for local charitable giving. Yet perhaps the most profound impact remains invisible, occurring in the quiet moments when individuals choose compassion over indifference, when they decide that someone else's need matters more than their own comfort. These choices, multiplied across thousands of communities, are slowly reshaping what it means to live in society with others. As Dr. Hoffman concludes, Celestine thought she was saving one orphanage. In reality, she gave millions of people permission to believe in their own capacity for heroism. That might be the most valuable gift of all.